A millionaire decides not to raise his paraplegic son and abandons him along with the mother. Years later, he returns, trying to change his public image, but the past hits back with full force. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. The light from the city skyline reflected off the polished surface of Marco Bennett's desk. 40 stories above Wall Street, his corner office provided a commanding view of the financial district he had conquered over 2 decades of relentless ambition. The deal is secure, Mr. Bennett. The board just unanimously approved your proposal. His assistant, Diana, placed a folder on his desk with practiced precision. Good. Marco barely looked up from his computer screen, where stock prices scrolled endlessly. His response was as cold and calculated as the algorithms he had pioneered to predict market fluctuations. At 52, Marco Bennett had built Bennett Financial Group into an empire that rivaled the oldest institutions on Wall Street. His silver-streaked dark hair and tailored suits had become iconic in financial magazines that lauded him as the Oracle of Manhattan. His phone rang with a familiar tone. For the briefest moment, something flickered across his face. Discomfort, perhaps fear. He let it ring 3 times before answering. "It's time for your interview with Forbes, sir," Diana reminded him from the doorway. "Send them up." Marco straightened his crimson tie, a ritual before any public appearance. The interview would focus on his latest endeavor, the Bennett Foundation for Adaptive Technologies. After decades of ruthless business maneuvers, Marco Bennett had seemingly transformed into a philanthropist, specifically championing technologies for children with disabilities. The financial press called it a surprising pivot. Those who knew him longer called it puzzling, but nobody questioned Marco Bennett, at least not to his face. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for making time." The journalist Sarah Calloway extended her hand. "Your foundation's recent announcement about providing adaptive wheelchairs to children with cerebral palsy has generated significant interest." Marco smiled with practiced charm. "It's time. We use technology to give these children the mobility and independence they deserve." "What inspired this particular focus?" Sarah asked, recorder already running. Marco's pause was imperceptible to anyone who didn't know him well. "Some causes choose you. This one found me." The practiced line hid 15 years of a different story entirely. 300 miles away in a modest Boston apartment, Elena Martinez adjusted her reading glasses as she scrolled through her social media feed. At 49, her once jet-black hair now carried streaks of silver, but her determined brown eyes remained unchanged. She had built a respectable life as a special education consultant, helping families navigate the complex systems that supported children with disabilities. "Mom, could you check this code for me?" Her son called from his bedroom. "Coming, Alex." She set down her tablet and walked down the short hallway. Alexander Martinez sat in his motorized wheelchair, fingers flying across his customized keyboard. At 21, he had his mother's sharp intelligence and an artistic sensibility entirely his own. His bedroom walls displayed digital art prints, landscapes and abstract compositions he had created, each signed with his distinctive AMB signature. "I think I've finally fixed the render timing issue," Alex said without looking up. His latest project, a software program that translated music into visual patterns, was nearing completion. He had already received interest from a local university about its potential applications for music education. Elena looked over his shoulder at the lines of code, occasionally pointing out potential improvements. They worked in comfortable synchronicity, a partnership forged through years of being each other's only constant support. "There's a documentary on PBS tonight about adaptive tech. Want to watch?" Elena asked casually. "Can't. I have a video call with Professor Whitaker about the exhibition." Alex saved his work and spun his chair to face his mother. "But I recorded that interview with that financial guy you used to know. The one starting the foundation for kids with CP. Thought you might want to see it." Elena's expression hardened. "I have no interest in seeing Marco Bennett pretend to be Humanitarian of the Year." "Figured," Alex shrugged. "Just thought you should know he's back in the spotlight." Eleanor returned to the living room and picked up her tablet again. Against her better judgment, she searched for Marco Bennett. Immediately, headlines about his new foundation appeared. There he was, older, but unmistakable, standing behind a podium announcing millions in funding for adaptive technology research. Her hands trembled slightly as memories flooded back. The early days when Marco had been just an ambitious trader with dreams of building something lasting. The night he had proposed on the Brooklyn Bridge, the joyful months of pregnancy, and then the diagnosis that had changed everything. Their newborn son had cerebral palsy. Marco had withdrawn almost immediately, disappearing into longer workdays and business trips. And then one morning he was simply gone. A brief note and emptied drawers were all he left behind. No explanation, no support, no contact information. Eleanor had been left alone with a 6-month-old who would need specialized care for life. Now, 15 years later, Marco Bennett appeared on her screen, discussing his commitment to children with disabilities, children just like the son he had abandoned. She closed the browser and set the tablet aside, her jaw tight with anger. "The absolute nerve," she whispered to the empty room. Back in New York, Marco concluded his interview with practiced humility. "This foundation isn't about me. It's about giving these children the tools they need to express their full potential." 1. "Last question," Sarah said. "Your announcement mentioned a personal connection to this cause, but you've never spoken about it publicly. Would you care to elaborate?" Marco maintained his composed expression, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his armrest. "Some things are too personal to share, even for someone in the public eye. Let's just say I understand the challenges these families face, and I want to make their journeys easier than they might otherwise be." After the journalist left, Marco stood at his office window, looking out at the city he had conquered. His empire stretched beyond these glass walls: investments, properties, influence. He had everything he had ever worked for. But tonight, as happened increasingly often, the victory felt hollow. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Bennett, your son's art exhibition opens tomorrow in Boston. Should I make travel?" "Arrangements." Marco closed his eyes briefly. "No, send flowers." "The usual card." "Yes, sir." He turned back to the cityscape, the empire builder alone in his tower, as a photograph sat face down in his desk drawer, a photo of a baby boy he had walked away from 15 years ago, a decision that haunted every philanthropic check he now signed. The past was about to collide with the present, and Marco Bennett's carefully constructed facade would soon begin to crack. The Boston Gallery of Digital Arts buzzed with conversations as patrons moved through the exhibition space. Alex Martinez observed from near the entrance, his wheelchair positioned, to give him a clear view of everyone experiencing his work. Each wall displayed large screens showing his dynamic digital compositions, colorful landscapes that transformed in response to music playing throughout the gallery. "They love it," whispered Jessica Chen, the curator who had discovered Alex's work at a university showcase 6 months earlier. The Boston Chronicle's art critic has been staring at Soundscape in blue for 20 minutes. Alex nodded, a quiet smile playing on his lips. At 21, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that drew people to him. Despite the physical limitations imposed by cerebral palsy, his expressive brown eyes and quick wit made him magnetic. He had inherited his mother's warm complexion and determined jaw, but people who knew his history sometimes whispered about how his analytical gaze resembled someone else entirely. "Where's your mom?" Jessica asked, scanning the crowd. "Running late. School district emergency meeting or something," Alex replied, adjusting the small control panel on his wheelchair. "She'll be here." Across the room, a tall arrangement of white roses and orchids sat on a pedestal with a small card. Alex had noticed it earlier but hadn't approached it yet. Every opening, every achievement, the same flowers appeared with the same impersonal message: "Congratulations, MB." No signature, just initials. The first time, when he was 16 and had won a coding competition, his mother had nearly thrown them in the trash. Now they just became part of the background, acknowledged but never discussed. Alex Martinez? A woman with sharp eyes and a press badge approached. I'm Rebecca Winters from Digital Arts Monthly. I'd love to get a few quotes about your inspirations. As Alex engaged with the journalist, explaining the algorithms behind his visual compositions, he didn't notice the tall figure who entered the gallery, hovering uncertainly at the periphery of the crowd. Marco Bennett had not planned to attend. He had ordered the flowers, as he always did, planning to read about the exhibition's success in the arts section of whatever newspaper covered it. But something had changed during his last television appearance when he'd announced the Foundation's new initiative. The question from an audience member had been simple enough. Mr. Bennett, you're supporting all these children with adaptive technologies, but do you actually know any of them personally? He had delivered a polished non-answer, but the question lingered, becoming a persistent whisper in his mind. 15 years of expensive flowers and anonymous donations had created a strange, one-sided relationship with a son who likely hated him, if he thought of him at all. So here he stood, in a Boston art gallery, watching a young man in a wheelchair discuss complex algorithms with impressive articulation and confidence. Alexander had Elena's eyes, Marco realized with a jolt, the same intense focus when explaining something she was passionate about. Marco edged closer, staying behind a group of patrons, listening as Alex described his creative process. The E program interprets emotional qualities in the music's key signatures and translates them into color palettes, Alex was explaining. Minor keys trend toward blues and purples, while major keys bring out warmer tones. Fascinating, Rebecca remarked. And this is all your original code? Every line, Alex confirmed with understated pride. Though my mom helped debug some of the earlier versions, she picked up coding pretty quickly for someone who started learning alongside me. Marco absorbed this information silently. Elena had learned coding to help their son. Of course she had. She had always been resourceful, determined, qualities he had once admired before they had made him feel inadequate in the face of their child's diagnosis. Is your father also technically inclined? The journalist asked innocently. Marco tensed, holding his breath. I wouldn't know, Alex replied evenly, his expression unchanged. He hasn't been part of the picture. Marco felt the words like a physical blow, though they contained no emotion, just a simple statement of fact. He hadn't been part of the picture. 15 years of absence reduced to 5 words. He should leave, he thought. This had been a mistake. But before he could retreat, the gallery doors opened and Elena Martinez entered, immediately scanning the room for her son. Marco stepped behind a display column, his heart racing in a way it hadn't since the 2008 financial crisis. Elena had aged gracefully. Her hair was shorter now, with silver strands mingling with the black, and reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. She moved purposefully through the crowd, carrying herself with the same quiet dignity he remembered. She reached Alex and placed a hand on his shoulder, leaning down to whisper something that made him laugh. Marco watched their easy interaction, the familiar way they communicated, a relationship built on years of trust and shared experiences, from which he had excluded himself. The hollow feeling in his chest expanded. Just then Alex looked up and their eyes met across the gallery. For a moment, neither moved. Marco saw the exact instant of recognition, not from memory, but from magazine covers and television appearances. Alex's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and he whispered something to his mother. Elena turned, and the color drained from her face when she saw Marco. 15 years compressed into a single moment of recognition. Her hand tightened on Alex's shoulder. Marco took a step forward, then another, unable to retreat now that he had been seen. The crowd seemed to part between them, though the gallery continued its normal hum of activity, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding in its midst. Elena, Marco said when he reached them, his voice lower than he intended. Alexander. Marco. Elena's voice was ice. What are you doing here? He glanced around at the displays. I wanted to see the exhibition. After 15 years, you decided to just show up. Eleanor's controlled tone betrayed decades of anger. Alex studied Marco with a clinical detachment that was somehow worse than anger. "So you're the flower sender." Marco nodded, unsure what else to say. "I see you've discovered a convenient conscience," Elena said, moving protectively closer to Alex. "Your foundation's been getting excellent press." The accusation stung because it contained truth. The foundation had started as a reputation-building exercise suggested by his PR team, but somewhere along the way, it had become more personal, though he couldn't articulate that transformation even to himself. "Mom," Alex said quietly, "it's my night. Let's not do this here." Elena immediately softened, squeezing her son's shoulder. "You're right. This is about your achievement." She turned a cool gaze to Marco, "which you had no part in." "Congratulations on the exhibition," Marco said to Alex, ignoring Elena's barb. "Your work is remarkable." "Thank you," Alex replied with impeccable politeness that created more distance than rudeness ever could. Rebecca Winters, sensing tension, approached with her recorder. "Mr. Martinez, could we continue?" She stopped, recognizing Marco. "Wait, you're Marco Bennett, the financier." "He was just leaving," Elena said firmly. "Actually," Rebecca said, looking between them with growing interest, "are you connected to the exhibition somehow, Mr. Bennett?" The question hung in the air. Marco looked at Alex, who returned his gaze with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Bennett is an admirer of digital art," Alex said smoothly. "He runs a foundation for adaptive technologies." The deflection was masterful, truthful, yet revealing nothing of their connection. Marco recognized the political skill in it, something he himself had perfected in boardrooms. "Of course," Rebecca nodded. "Your foundation's work with assistive technologies has been making headlines. Did you know Alex developed his own custom interface for his digital art?" "I didn't," Marco said, genuinely impressed despite the tension. "That's extraordinary." "Necessity breeds innovation," Alex replied. "When standard tools don't work for you, you build your own." The subtext wasn't lost on Marco. While he had been absent, his son had constructed not just tools, but an entire life without him. "I should let you get back to your guests," Marco said, finally reading the room. "It was good to see you both." 15 years, Marco," Elena said quietly, so only he could hear. "You don't get to just walk back in." As Marco retreated toward the exit, a young woman intercepted him. Petite, with intelligent eyes and a press badge that read, "Cassidy Taylor, Boston Independent." "Mr. Bennett," she said, falling into step beside him. "I couldn't help noticing that interaction. There's more to your foundation's origin story than you've been sharing, isn't there?" Marco stopped, studying her perceptive expression. "Young lady, in journalism, timing is everything. And this isn't the time." "Then when is?" she pressed, "because it seems to me that a financial titan starting a foundation specifically for cerebral palsy after that conversation with Elena and Alex Martinez might be exactly the kind of story people should hear." Marco went cold. "How do you—" "Public records exist, Mr. Bennett. Marriage certificates, birth certificates." Cassidy's expression softened slightly. "And I grew up with Alex. Went to school together before college." Marco looked back at his son across the gallery, the young man he had abandoned, now surrounded by admirers of his artistic vision. "Whatever story you think you've found," Marco said, "it's not that simple." "It never is," Cassidy agreed. "That's what makes it worth telling. Here's my card. When you're ready to tell your side, call me." Marco took the card automatically, his mind racing. As he left the gallery, the cool Boston evening did nothing to calm the storm building inside him. Seeing them, Elena's cold anger, Alex's detached politeness, had shaken him more than he anticipated. Back in his hotel room, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Diana, cancel tomorrow's meetings, all of them, and contact our foundation director. I want to move up the timeline on the Boston initiative. Yes, immediately." The past he had walked away from had found him, or perhaps he had finally stopped running from it. Either way, the carefully constructed walls between Marco Bennett, the financial titan, and Marco Bennett, the absent father, were beginning to crumble. Cassidy Taylor tapped her pen against her notebook as she sat in the crowded cafe across from Boston University's main campus. 3 weeks had passed since Alexander Martinez's exhibition opening, and the article she had written about the emerging digital artist had generated unexpected buzz. What she hadn't included, yet, was the strange interaction she had witnessed between the Martinezes and Marco Bennett. The cafe door opened, and Alex navigated his wheelchair through the entrance with practiced ease. He spotted her immediately and made his way to her table. "Thanks for meeting me," Cassidy said, sliding a coffee toward him. "Americano, black, 1 sugar." "You remembered," Alex said with a slight smile. They had dated briefly during their senior year of high school, a relationship that had evolved into a solid friendship through college as they pursued different paths. "How's the exhibition going?" she asked. 3 pieces sold, and the university's digital media department wants to discuss a permanent installation." Alex sipped his coffee, studying her over the rim. "But that's not why you called this meeting." Cassidy leaned forward. "I'm working on a feature about adaptive technology in the arts. Your work is the perfect centerpiece, but—" she hesitated. "There's something else. That man at your opening, Marco Bennett." Alex's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened around his cup. "What about him?" "He's not just some random financial guy interested in your work, is he?" Cassidy watched him carefully. "His foundation focuses specifically on cerebral palsy. He appeared at your exhibition, and when I did some digging, I found a marriage certificate for Marco Bennett and Elena Martinez from 22 years ago." Alex was silent for a long moment. "You always were too smart for your own good, Cass." "He's your father, isn't he?" Alex nodded once. "Biologically speaking. He left when you were what? 6 months old, right after my diagnosis." Alex's tone was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "Classic story. Man can't handle having a disabled kid, bails on his family." Cassidy reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "I'm sorry, I had no idea." "It's not something we advertise," Alex shrugged. "Mom raised me on her own. We did fine." "And now he's back, with his foundation and philanthropy." Cassidy let the implication hang. "Convenient timing." Alex's eyes hardened. 15 years of nothing, and suddenly he's the champion of children with disabilities. "Have you spoken with him since the exhibition?" Alex's jaw tightened. "He's been persistent. Calls, emails, even had his foundation offer me a position as a creative consultant, as if that would erase everything." "What does your mum say?" "She's furious. Won't even discuss it." Alex traced the rim of his cup. "But yesterday, something strange happened. A lawyer contacted her about some documents from back then. Apparently, there's more to the story of why he left." Cassidy's journalistic instincts sharpened. "What kind of documents?" "I don't know yet. Mom's meeting with the lawyer today." Alex looked directly at Cassidy. "Which is why I agreed to see you. Whatever this is, I want someone I trust to help me make sense of it." "Are you asking me as a friend or a journalist?" "Both," Alex admitted. "You're good at digging, Cass, better than I am. And if there's something hidden in my family's past, I want to know what it is." Elena Martinez sat stiffly in the leather chair across from Martin Wells, a gray-haired attorney whose office overlooked Boston Harbor. The folder on his desk remained closed, and she couldn't stop staring at it. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming," Wells said. "I understand this is unexpected." "Just tell me why I'm here," Elena replied. "Your message mentioned documents related to my ex-husband." "Ex-husband is technically incorrect," Wells said gently. "According to our records, you and Mr. Bennett are never legally divorced." Elena blinked in surprise. "That's impossible. He left. He abandoned us." "Yes, he did," Wells agreed, "but no divorce proceedings were ever initiated by either party." "He disappeared," Elena said, her voice rising slightly. "I couldn't even find him to serve papers." Wells nodded sympathetically. "That brings me to why I've contacted you. These documents were entrusted to our firm 15 years ago, with instructions that they remain sealed unless Mr. Bennett returned to Boston or attempted to contact you or your son." "What documents?" Elena demanded. Wells opened the folder and removed several papers. A letter explaining his departure, financial records, and this. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. This is addressed specifically to you, with instructions that you read it privately. Elena stared at the envelope, recognizing Marco's handwriting. Why now, after 15 years? I understand Mr. Bennett attended your son's exhibition recently. That triggered the release protocol. Elena took the envelope with trembling fingers. What's in the financial records? Wells removed his glasses. Evidence that on the day before Mr. Bennett left, his business partner Richard Wentworth threatened to reveal certain information unless Mr. Bennett divested completely from your family. What information? The documents don't specify. But they do show that a trust was established in Alexander's name, with instructions that the funds be held until his 25th birthday, or until Mr. Bennett made contact again. Elena's mind raced. Richard Wentworth had been Marco's senior partner when they were building the firm. A ruthless man who had never approved of Marco's marriage to her, a woman from a working-class background with no connections to leverage. How much is in this trust? She asked. Wells named a figure that made Elena grip the armrests of her chair. That's impossible, she whispered. If Marco set aside that much money, why did we struggle for years? Why did I have to work 3 jobs to pay for Alex's therapies? The trust was frozen by legal maneuvers from Mr. Wentworth's attorneys, Wells explained. It's only now, with Mr. Bennett's return and his current position of power, that these obstacles have been cleared. Elena clutched the sealed letter. So you're telling me Marco didn't just abandon us because he couldn't handle having a disabled child, that there was some kind of business blackmail involved? The evidence suggests it's more complicated than a simple abandonment, Wells said carefully, but I believe the letter may provide more context. Across town, Marco Bennett sat in a conference room at the Bennett Foundation's newly opened Boston office. The space still smelled of fresh paint and new furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the Charles River, where rowing teams practiced in the afternoon sun. The Boston Children's Hospital is excited about our partnership, Diana reported, projecting slides onto the wall screen. They've identified 30 children who could benefit immediately from the adaptive technology program. Marco nodded, but his attention drifted to the window. Somewhere in this city, Elena was meeting with Martin Wells, receiving the documents he had arranged 15 years ago in a desperate attempt to leave some explanation, some provision for the family he was being forced to abandon. Mr. Bennett, Diana prompted, should we proceed with the funding approval? Yes, he said, refocusing. Immediate approval. I want those children to have their adaptive equipment within the month. The door opened and his security director entered with a concerned expression. Sir, there's someone insisting on seeing you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite persistent. Who is it? A Cassidy Taylor from the Boston Independent. Says it's about Alexander Martinez. Marco's pulse quickened. Send her in. Diana looked surprised. Sir, we haven't vetted this journalist or prepared talking points. It's fine, Diana. Please give us the room. Moments later, Cassidy entered, her expression professional, but with an undercurrent of determination. Mr. Bennett, thank you for seeing me. You mentioned Alexander, Marco said, not bothering with pleasantries. Is he all right? The genuine concern caught Cassidy off guard. He's fine, but he's about to learn some information about why you left 15 years ago, and I thought you should know. Marco's expression darkened. The trust documents, Wells contacted Elena. So it's true, Cassidy pressed. You were pressured to leave them. Marco stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city backdrop. Ms. Taylor, I assume you're recording this conversation? I'm not, actually, she replied. This visit isn't in my capacity as a journalist, it's as Alex's friend. Marco turned back, studying her. You care about him. I do. We've known each other since we were kids. Cassidy met his gaze steadily. He deserves to know the truth, whatever it is. Marco sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. The truth is rarely simple, Miss Taylor, especially when it involves Richard Wentworth. Your former business partner? My former partner, mentor, and eventually my blackmailer. Marco's voice hardened. Richard discovered some irregularities in our early financing, transactions that, while not strictly illegal, could have destroyed our reputation during a critical period of growth. And he used this against you? Not initially, not until Elena became pregnant. Marco's expression clouded with old pain. Richard never approved of our marriage. When Alexander was born with cerebral palsy, Richard saw it as the perfect leverage. He gave me a choice: leave them completely, with no contact or support. That could be traced back to me, or he would expose the financial irregularities and destroy everything we'd built. Cassidy frowned. You chose your business over your family. It wasn't that simple, Marco said sharply. I established a trust for Alexander, enough money to provide for his needs for a lifetime. But Richard's connections ran deep. He froze the assets through legal challenges I couldn't fight without revealing my connection. So you just disappeared? Cassidy's tone was incredulous. You couldn't have warned Elena, explained? Richard had me followed. Any contact would have triggered his plan. Marco ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. I left documents with Wells explaining everything, but they could only be released under specific circumstances. Like you showing up at Alex's exhibition, Cassidy concluded. Yes. Marco looked directly at her. For 15 years, I built my empire with one purpose: to become powerful enough that Richard Wentworth could never threaten me again. 2. Create a foundation that could help children like Alexander, even if I couldn't help him directly. And Richard Wentworth? A grim smile crossed Marco's face. 5 years ago, I orchestrated a takeover of his holdings. He's now retired to a very modest lifestyle in Arizona. The man who once controlled half of Boston's financial district can't get a loan for a golf cart. Cassidy absorbed this information, her journalist's mind already structuring the narrative. Does Alex know any of this? He will soon, assuming Eleanor shares the letter. Marco's expression became vulnerable. But will it matter? 15 years is a long time. Explanations don't erase absence. No, Cassidy agreed. They don't, but they might be a place to start. In her apartment, Eleanor sat on her sofa, the opened letter trembling in her hands as she read Marco's final words written 15 years earlier. The explanation of Wentworth's threats, the trust fund, the impossible choice he had faced. With each paragraph, 15 years of anger began to transform, not dissipating but evolving into something more complex. The apartment door opened, and Alex wheeled in, immediately noticing his mother's tear-stained face and the papers scattered across the coffee table. "Mom, what happened?" Eleanor looked up, her expression a storm of emotions. "We need to talk about your father, Alex. The real reason he left wasn't what we thought." Alex moved closer, picking up one of the documents, a trust agreement with his name prominently displayed, alongside a figure that made his eyes widen. "What is this?" "The beginnings of an explanation," Elena said softly. "Not an excuse for 15 years of absence, but context." As Eleanor began to explain, Alex's ordered understanding of his past, the simple narrative of abandonment he had constructed to make sense of his father's absence, began to fracture. The black and white certainty gave way to shades of grey, where villainy and victimhood blurred together in uncomfortable ways. And across the city, Marco Bennett stared at his phone, willing it to ring, wondering if the truth, finally revealed, would be enough to open a door to the family he had sacrificed everything to protect, and in doing so, lost completely. The Bennett Foundation's inaugural gala transformed the Boston Museum of Fine Arts into a showcase of innovation and possibility. Interactive displays demonstrated adaptive technologies for children with various disabilities, while screens throughout the Grand Hall played testimonials from families whose lives had been changed by the Foundation's work. At the center of it all stood Marco Bennett, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo, shaking hands and accepting congratulations with practiced charm. But his eyes kept drifting to the entrance. "They might not come," Diana murmured beside him, having noticed his distraction. "I know," Marco replied, maintaining his smile for the donors surrounding him, but the invitation was accepted. It had been 2 weeks since the trust documents had been revealed, 2 weeks of uncomfortable revelations and painful conversations conducted through intermediaries. Eleanor had responded to his formal request for a meeting with a counteroffer. They would attend the gala, observe his foundation's work firsthand, and afterward, they would talk. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door cracked open after 15 years of silence. At precisely 8:30, Alex and Elena entered the grand hall. Eleanor wore a simple but elegant navy dress, her silver-streaked hair swept into a sophisticated updo. Beside her, Alex had chosen a charcoal suit with a blue tie that matched his mother's dress, a united front, visually declaring their connection. Marco excused himself from his conversation and crossed the room, each step carrying the weight of 15 years of absence. "Thank you for coming," he said when he reached them, his usually confident voice subdued. "Your foundation's work is impressive," Elena acknowledged, her tone neutral. "The adaptive painting system for children with limited motor control is particularly thoughtful." "That was actually inspired by something in the letter from Wells," Marco admitted. "I mentioned how Alexander used to reach for colors when he was a baby, how frustrated he became when he couldn't grasp them precisely." Alex's expression shifted slightly, surprised that such a detail had been remembered, preserved in his father's memory for all these years. "Would you like a tour?" Marco offered. "There are some people here I think you might find interesting to speak with, Alexander." "Alex," he corrected automatically. "I go by Alex." Marco nodded, accepting the correction. "Alex, the head of MIT's adaptive technology. Program is eager to meet you. Your work has caught their attention." As they moved through the exhibits, an uncomfortable truce held between them. Elena observed Marco with guarded eyes, noting how staff and beneficiaries alike responded to him, with genuine warmth, rather than the fearful deference she remembered from his early career. Alex engaged intellectually with the technologies on display, occasionally offering insights that drew appreciative nods from the engineers present. Across the room, Cassidy Taylor observed the trio while pretending to take notes on the Foundation's latest initiatives. She had been invited as press, but her interest was far more personal. As Alex's friend, she had watched him process the revelations about his father's departure, the anger, confusion, and reluctant acknowledgement that the simple narrative of abandonment he had constructed didn't capture the whole truth. "Quite the family reunion," commented a voice beside her. Cassidy turned to find herself face to face with an elderly man leaning on an expensive cane, his tailored suit slightly too large for his diminished frame. "I'm sorry," she replied cautiously. "Marco, Eleanor, and the boy." The man nodded toward them. "Quite touching, isn't it? Bennett's little redemption story." Something in his tone, bitter, resentful, raised Cassidy's journalistic instincts. "You know them?" "I know Marco better than most." The man extended a hand. "Richard Wentworth. I was his business partner when he was still learning which fork to use at dinner." Cassidy's pulse quickened as she shook his hand. "The Richard Wentworth I thought you were in Arizona." A cold smile crossed his face. "I still maintain certain social connections, enough to secure an invitation to tonight's spectacle." He gestured around dismissively. "All this philanthropy, so unlike the Marco I knew." "People change," Cassidy suggested, studying him carefully. "Do they?" Wentworth's gaze hardened as he watched Marco lean down to examine something on Alex's wheelchair. Or do they just become better at hiding who they really are? "The control system uses eye-tracking technology paired with neural feedback," the MIT professor was explaining to Alex. "But your approach using musical frequencies as computational shortcuts is fascinating. We'd love to explore a collaboration." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "I'd be interested in discussing possibilities." Eleanor stood slightly apart, watching her. Son engaged with the technological elite as an equal, something she had always known was possible, but had fought so hard to create opportunities for. Her gaze drifted to Marco, who was listening intently to Alex's technical questions, a subtle pride visible in his expression. For a moment she could see glimpses of what might have been, a family united by their son's brilliance rather than divided by absence. The thought brought a complicated ache to her chest. 15 years of solo parenting couldn't be erased by explanations or trust funds, no matter how legitimate the reasons for Marco's departure might have been. Elena. Marco had approached while she was lost in thought. "Would you like something to drink?" "White wine, if they have it," she replied, surprising herself with the casual response. They moved toward the bar, creating a small bubble of privacy in the crowded room. "He's remarkable," Marco said, nodding toward Alex, who was now demonstrating something on his tablet to an enthralled group of engineers. "You did an amazing job raising him." "I didn't have a choice," Elena replied, accepting the wine glass he offered. "When you're the only parent, you just do what needs to be done." "I know my explanation doesn't change that," Marco acknowledged, his usual confidence subdued. "Nothing can give you back those years or give him back a father." Elena studied him over the rim of her glass. "Why the foundation, Marco, really? Was it just image rehabilitation?" "It started that way," he admitted, the honesty unexpected. "My PR team suggested it 5 years ago when I was expanding into European markets, but then I started meeting the families, seeing the children." He paused, struggling to articulate the transformation. "For 15 years, I told myself I'd protected you both by staying away, that the trust would have provided if Wentworth hadn't interfered. But these families showed me what you and Alex lost wasn't just financial support." Before Elena could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Richard Wentworth was approaching, his cane tapping imperiously against the marble floor, Cassidy following close behind with a concerned expression. "Marco," Wentworth called, his voice carrying across the hall. "Magnificent event, so charitable." Marco tensed visibly. "Richard, this is a surprise." "I wouldn't miss it," Wentworth replied with a cold smile. "Your great public redemption. The abandoned family, the foundation for disabled children, its theatrical genius." Elena stepped forward. "Mr. Wentworth, we've never met, but I believe you played a significant role in my life, nonetheless." Wentworth appraised her with undisguised condescension. "Mrs. Bennett, or is it Martinez now? Marco never did. File those divorce papers." "It's Ms. Martinez," she corrected firmly. "And I've read the documents you tried to suppress, the trust fund you froze, the threats you made." "Business is business," Wentworth shrugged. Marco understood the stakes. Across the room, Alex had noticed the confrontation and was navigating toward them, his expression concerned. Cassidy caught his eye, giving a slight nod to confirm his suspicion about Wentworth's identity. "Why are you here, Richard?" Marco demanded, keeping his voice low despite his obvious anger. "Curiosity," Wentworth replied. "I wanted to see if your little family would actually forgive you, if your money and explanations would be enough to erase 15 years of abandonment." "That's enough," Alex said as he joined them, his quiet voice cutting through the tension. "Whatever you came here to accomplish, Mr. Wentworth, you won't find satisfaction." Wentworth's eyebrows rose as he took in Alex's wheelchair, and then, more significantly, the intelligence in his steady gaze. "Alexander Bennett, the reason for all this drama." "Martinez," Alex corrected. "My name is Alexander Martinez." The correction landed like a blow. Marco's expression flickered with pain, but he remained silent, accepting the distancing for what it was, a consequence of his absence, regardless of the reasons. "You know," Wentworth continued, seemingly unperturbed, "your father made quite the sacrifice for you, walked away from his family to protect his empire. I always wondered if it would be worth it in the end." "That wasn't his choice to make alone," Elena interjected. "Wasn't it?" Wentworth countered. "The alternative would have destroyed everything he'd built, left nothing for any of you." "You forced that choice," Marco said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "You leveraged a child's disability against his own father." Wentworth's expression hardened. I gave you clarity, Marco. Family or fortune, you chose. And you've spent 15 years paying for that choice, Cassidy observed, moving beside Alex protectively. From what I understand, your own fortune disappeared rather dramatically 5 years ago. Alex looked between them, understanding dawning. The hostile takeover. That was revenge. Justice, Marco corrected quietly. Everything he took from us I took back, with interest. Wentworth smiled thinly. And yet here you are still trying to buy your way back into their lives. The great Marco Bennett, thinking money can solve everything. He turned to Alex. Has he told you about the fellowships he's established in your name, the research grants, all that guilt transformed into tax-deductible charity? Alex's expression remained measured. Whatever his motivations, the foundation is helping real people. Such maturity, Wentworth mocked. But then you had to grow up quickly, didn't you? No father to guide you. That's enough, Elena said sharply. You've made your point, Mr. Wentworth. Now I suggest you leave before I ask security to escort you out. Wentworth studied them. Elena's protective stance, Marco's controlled anger, Alex's steady gaze, and seemed to recognize something that disturbed him. These were not broken people he could manipulate or intimidate. Whatever damage his machinations had caused 15 years ago, they had survived and in their own ways thrived. This little family reunion won't last, he said, his composure slipping. Some bridges stay burned, Marco, remember that. As he turned to leave, Cassidy stepped forward. Mr. Wentworth, for my article on the Foundation, would you care to comment on your role in separating a father from his disabled infant son? I'm sure our readers would find your perspective illuminating. Wentworth's face paled slightly. Without responding, he walked away, his cane striking the floor with angry emphasis. In the silence that followed, the four of them stood in a strange tableau, a family fractured and partially reformed, with Cassidy as witness to the transformation. I think, Marco said finally, we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. The Bennett Foundation's conference room offered a stark contrast to the gala's opulence. Here, with the city lights spread below them and the celebration continuing without them floors below, they could finally speak honestly. I should have found another way, Marco said, breaking the silence. That's what I've realized over the years. I thought I was protecting you by disappearing completely, but I was also protecting myself from having to face what I'd done. Elena sat beside Alex, her hand resting lightly on his arm. You could have fought harder for the trust to remain accessible. You could have found a way to let us know what was happening. I was being watched, Marco explained. Wentworth had investigators tracking my every move. Any contact would have triggered his threats. And what exactly were these threats based on? Alex asked, his analytical mind focusing on the core issue. What leverage did he have that was so powerful? Marco hesitated, then reached into his jacket and removed a flash drive. Financial transactions from the early days of our firm. Nothing explicitly illegal, but questionable enough that had they been exposed during our crucial expansion phase, everything would have collapsed. Investments would have been withdrawn, regulatory investigations launched. And that was worth abandoning your family? Elena's question held no accusation now, just a need to understand. At the time, I convinced myself I was making the only possible choice. The trust should have provided for you both financially, Marco replied. But I was wrong, not just about the trust being accessible, but about what you really needed from me. He looked directly at Alex, which wasn't money at all. Alex was silent for a long moment, processing. These documents, he said finally, they explain why you left, but not why you stayed away as your power grew. At some point, you became strong enough to challenge Wentworth. You destroyed him financially 5 years ago. Why not contact us then? It was the question Marco had dreaded, the one that cut through rationalizations to the core of his failure. Fear, he admitted, the word costing him visibly. Not of Wentworth by then, but of facing what I'd done, of seeing the damage, of being rejected. He gestured helplessly. It was easier to help from a distance, to create the foundation, to send the flowers, to watch your achievements from afar. Cowardice, Elena said simply. Yes, Marco acknowledged, dressed up as consideration or strategy, but ultimately cowardice. Alex wheeled his chair slightly away from the table, creating distance as he processed. For years I told myself I didn't need you, that Mom and I had built something stronger without you, but, Marco prompted gently when Alex trailed off. But I still looked for you, Alex admitted. In crowds, at school events, birthdays. I had this fantasy that you'd just appear one day with a perfect explanation. A bitter smile crossed his face. And now you have, and it's both better and worse than I imagined. Better because you didn't just leave because of my disability. Worse because at some point, you chose to stay away. The truth hung between them, painful in its simplicity. Cassidy, who had been silent in her corner of the room, spoke up. I've been thinking about a line from one of Alex's artist statements for his exhibition. Transformations occur at the intersection of necessity and possibility. Maybe that applies here too. They all turned to her, surprised by the insight. What I mean, she continued, is that the past can't be changed. The absence happened. The pain was real. But what's possible now, what's necessary now, is to decide what happens next. Alex nodded slowly. The question isn't whether I can forgive what happened 15 years ago. It's whether we can build something meaningful from this point forward. Can we? Marco asked, vulnerability naked in his voice. Elena studied her ex-husband, the man she had once loved, the father who had abandoned them, and now this older, humbled version seeking redemption. Not instantly, she said honestly. Not completely, but perhaps gradually. Alex wheeled back to the table. I've spent my life creating digital worlds where transformations follow rules I establish, where I control the algorithms of change. But human relationships don't work that way. He met Marco's gaze directly. I don't know if I can call you Dad again. I don't know if we'll ever have what we might have had, but I'm willing to see what's possible. Marco nodded, accepting. The limited opening for what it was. Not forgiveness, but permission to begin earning it. That's more than I deserve. Yes, Alex agreed with unexpected lightness. It is. But Mom taught me that life isn't about what people deserve. It's about what they need, and sometimes what they're willing to give. Outside the window, Boston stretched before them, its lights and shadows embodying the complexity of their situation, neither fully resolved nor hopelessly broken. Just human, with all the messiness that entailed. So, Cassidy said, breaking the heavy silence that had settled, about that article on the Foundation. You can't possibly publish this family drama, Marco began, slipping momentarily back into his controlling businessman persona. Actually, Alex interrupted, I think she should. He turned to Cassidy. Not as a scandal or an expose, but as the real story behind the Foundation, about how failure and redemption can coexist, about how philanthropy can be both self-serving and genuinely helpful at the same time. Complex narratives don't usually make for viral content, Cassidy warned. But they make for truth, Elena said, and after 15 years of secrets and silence, I think we could all use some truth. Marco looked between them, the son he had abandoned, the woman he had left behind, and the journalist who had unexpectedly facilitated their reunion. Truth it is, then, he agreed. Where do we start? Alex smiled slightly, not with easy forgiveness, but with cautious hope. I think we just did. 6 months later, Cassidy's article, The Bennett Reconnection, Philanthropy, Forgiveness and Second Chances, had become the most discussed feature in Boston media circles. The Bennett Foundation had expanded its programs to include arts initiatives for disabled youth, with Alex serving as a consultant while continuing his own creative career. Elena and Marco maintained a careful friendship, bound by their shared concern for their son rather than any romantic reconciliation. Weekly dinners became a tradition, sometimes uncomfortable, often healing, always honest. I still can't believe the neural interface prototype actually works, Alex said, demonstrating the technology that allowed him to create digital art with minimal physical movement. The researchers said it would take years to perfect. They didn't have your algorithms, Marco replied, watching his son with undisguised pride. Or your determination. Eleanor observed them from across the restaurant table, the genetic similarities more apparent now that she allowed herself to see them. The same analytical gaze, the same subtle tilt of the head when considering a complex problem. Not a perfect family, not a fully healed one, but a family nonetheless, transformed by necessity and possibility into something new. Outside, Boston's spring evening wrapped around them, neither denying the winter that had passed, nor promising an endless summer ahead, just offering the present moment with all its complicated grace. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marco, Eleanor, and Alex has moved you. For more emotionally profound journeys like this one, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore life's complexities and the power of human connection. We can't wait to see your thoughts in the comments section below.